Cop arrests black driver, then realizes he's the Attorney General. Before we dive in, kindly hit the subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. It was a quiet evening on the highway, the kind where the world feels still. But for Darnell Carter, it was just another long drive home after a 14-hour day. He was exhausted, but his mind was sharp. Darnell wasn't just any man heading home, he was the Attorney General of the state. The highest-ranking law enforcement officer, respected by governors, feared by criminals. But tonight, he was simply a black man driving a modest car in a part of town where people like him weren't supposed to belong. The flashing red and blue lights came out of nowhere. His stomach sank. He wasn't speeding. His registration was current. Everything was in order. Yet, as those sirens wailed behind him, he knew exactly what this stop was about. He pulled over calmly, rolled down the window, and placed both hands firmly on the steering wheel where they could be seen. His suit jacket was still crisp from earlier meetings at the Capitol, but in the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of the officer strutting toward his car, swagger heavy, hand already resting on his holster. License and registration, the cop barked without introduction. His tone wasn't neutral, it was sharp, dismissive, dripping with contempt. Darnell nodded politely. "Of course, officer. May I reach into my jacket pocket to retrieve my wallet?" The cop's eyes narrowed. "Don't get smart with me. Just do as you're told." Every word, every movement felt like a test. Darnell moved carefully, deliberately, pulling out his license and offering it with steady hands. But the officer barely glanced at it before scoffing. "Carter, huh? You don't look like no Carter I know. Where you headed, boy?" Darnell's jaw tightened. Boy. A word soaked in history, meant to cut down, to humiliate. Still, he answered evenly, "Heading home after work, sir." The officer circled the car like a predator. "Work? What do you do that gets you a car like this? You dealin'? You one of them scammers?" The questions were barbed hooks, designed to provoke. Darnell swallowed his pride. "I work in law enforcement." The cop chuckled coldly. "Law enforcement? Please. You. Don't make me laugh." Without warning, the officer yanked open the car door. "Step out. Now." The humiliation stung deeper than the autumn chill. Darnell complied, standing tall, his expensive tie now blowing gently in the night breeze. Yet the officer shoved him roughly against the car, frisking him with unnecessary force. "Thought so," the cop muttered. "Dressed up like you're somebody. Trying to act respectable. But I can smell a liar." Drivers slowed as they passed, staring at the scene, a black man in a suit, pinned against his own car, treated like a criminal. Darnell could feel anger boiling inside. He had fought his entire life to reach the position he held, fought through systemic barriers, through whispered doubts, through endless nights of studying law while working double shifts. And now, all of that was invisible to this officer, erased in an instant by the color of his skin. Finally, the officer pulled out cuffs. "You're under arrest. Suspicion of stolen property and resisting." Darnell froze. "Resisting? I haven't." "Quiet," the cop snapped. The metal clicked cold around his wrists. At that moment, the humiliation shifted into something sharper. Darnell locked eyes with the officer and spoke with quiet authority. "You have no idea what you've just done." The officer smirked. Yeah, I've heard it all before. Save it for the judge, if you can afford one." They shoved him into the back of the cruiser. The irony stung like fire, the highest legal authority in the state, trapped behind a steel cage, treated as nothing more than another stereotype. Back at the station, the whispers started almost immediately. Desk officers looked uneasy as they watched the suited man being marched in. Something about him didn't fit the usual narrative. But the arresting officer was arrogant, puffed up with power. Caught this one trying to play slick, he bragged. Claims he's in law enforcement. Can you believe that? Darnell said nothing. Not yet. He let the silence build, let the tension hang heavy in the room. The officer slammed the paperwork onto the desk, booking him for resisting and fraud. But the sergeant on duty frowned, looking closer at the ID that had been tossed carelessly on the counter. His eyes widened. Wait, this says. Before he could finish, Darnell finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, commanding. The kind of voice that filled courtrooms and hushed senators. My name, he said slowly, is Darnell Carter, Attorney General of this state. And I expect my rights to be restored immediately. The room went silent. The sergeant's mouth dropped open. Officers froze mid-step. Even the arresting officer blinked, confusion etched across his face before twisting into denial. You're lying, the cop spat. You're just some fraud with a fake ID. But the sergeant shook his head, pale as paper. No, he's telling the truth. I've seen him on the news. He's the real deal. The arresting officer's bravado faltered. For the first time, doubt crept into his eyes. That can't be. Darnell straightened his shoulders, even with the cuffs still binding his wrists. I told you. You had no idea what you were doing. But now the entire state will. The air in the room grew electric. Justice, irony, and retribution all hung heavy, ready to fall. The officer who had mocked him, shoved him, and humiliated him was about to learn the hard way that the man he thought powerless, was the very man who held the power to decide his fate. But just as the sergeant reached for the keys to unlock the cuffs, a voice echoed from the doorway. Hold it right there. Everyone turned. A tall man in a tailored suit stepped inside, flanked by two aides. His expression was cold, calculating. It was the governor. He looked at Darnell, then at the arresting officer. And in a voice that carried both authority and menace, he said, "This changes everything." The words weren't relief. They weren't apology. They were something else, something darker. Darnell straightened. Governor Whitaker. To what do I owe the pleasure? His voice was firm, steady, but underneath it was a simmering suspicion. Whitaker smirked, looking around at the stunned officers. Gentlemen, leave us. One by one, the other cops cleared the room, though their whispers lingered like smoke. Only the governor, the arresting officer, and Darnell remained. Whitaker walked slowly around Darnell, circling him like a hawk. Attorney General Carter, he said finally, his tone dripping with false familiarity. Imagine my surprise, hearing that you'd been arrested. My top law enforcement official, reduced to a suspect in his own state. Darnell's eyes narrowed. Reduced? No, Governor. Framed. Humiliated. Stripped of dignity on the side of the road for no reason other than the color of my skin. The arresting officer shifted uncomfortably, but Whitaker ignored him. He leaned closer to Darnell. Now, you could make this a scandal. You could hold press conferences, sue the department, call for resignations. And you'd win. Public sympathy would be on your side. But you and I both know what that would mean. Darnell didn't flinch. It would mean accountability. Something this state is long overdue for. The governor's smile thinned. It would mean chaos. It would mean headlines that undermine every single officer, every single leader, including me. And it would mean that the people who already don't trust this government, they'll burn what little faith they have left. Whitaker paused, letting his words hang. Then he said, slowly, so here's my offer. Let this go. Quietly. I'll make sure this officer is reassigned. You and I, we continue as if tonight never happened. The arrogance of it hit Darnell like a punch. The highest law enforcement officer in the state was being told to sweep his own humiliation under the rug, all for the sake of appearances. Darnell's voice dropped to a low, cutting tone. You want me to ignore injustice so that you can keep your image clean? Whitaker leaned in closer, whispering now. I want you to remember who put you in that seat. Don't forget, Carter, you may be Attorney General, but I'm still governor. And if you push this, you won't just be fighting one crooked cop. You'll be fighting the entire system. And I promise you, the system fights dirty. For the first time, the officer who had arrested Darnell looked shaken. He hadn't expected this. He thought his badge gave him power, but now he was seeing a larger machine at work, one that didn't care about him either. Darnell held Whitaker's gaze. His silence was heavy, but his mind was racing. If he accepted this deal, he'd betray not only himself but every black man and woman who had been stopped, frisked, or handcuffed for no reason. But if he fought back, he'd be challenging more than one man, he'd be declaring war on the establishment itself. Finally, Darnell spoke. You may control the system, Governor. But you don't control me. And you don't control the truth. Whitaker's jaw tightened. For the first time, the politician's mask cracked. His voice sharpened. Careful, Carter. You think you're untouchable, but I promise you, you are not. The tension snapped like a wire. The governor turned and strode out, leaving a storm in his wake. The next morning, the story had already begun to spread. Not from the governor, not from the police, but from the neighbors who had witnessed the arrest. Videos were online, clips showing Darnell in cuffs, dressed in his suit, being treated like a criminal. Hashtags trended overnight. Hashtag Justice for Carter. Hashtag Driving While Black. Hashtag Our Attorney General. The nation was watching. Reporters camped outside Darnell's home. Protesters gathered at the courthouse steps. Young people marched with signs reading, "If it can happen to him, it can happen to us." But as the movement grew, so did the threats. Anonymous calls came to Darnell's office. Envelopes with no return address, filled with letters that said things like, "Stay quiet, or else." Even his staff grew nervous, worried that they'd become targets too. One night, Darnell's wife found a brick thrown through their living room window. Attached was a note, "Stand down." The governor's warning wasn't empty. The system was fighting back. But Darnell refused to be silenced. He held a press conference on the courthouse steps, cameras flashing in the evening air. I was arrested, he declared, not because I broke the law, but because I was black in the wrong neighborhood. And when the governor asked me to bury that truth, I told him no. Because if we allow injustice to go unchecked at the highest levels, then none of us are safe. Not me, not you, not our children. The crowd roared, their cheers echoing through the city. But somewhere in the back, hidden in the shadows, the arresting officer watched. His face was pale, conflicted. He had been a pawn in something larger, and now he realized he was caught in the crossfire. Because what he knew, what only he knew, was that this stop hadn't been random. He hadn't admitted it at the precinct, but he'd been ordered to stop Darnell. Someone high up wanted the Attorney General humiliated, weakened. And that someone wasn't just the governor. That night, he showed up at Darnell's office, sweat on his brow, fear in his eyes. "There's something you need to know," the officer whispered. "It wasn't my choice to pull you over. It came from above. Higher than the governor. You're in danger, sir. Real danger." Darnell leaned forward, eyes locked on him. "Who ordered it?" The officer hesitated, trembling. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said the name. Darnell froze. The name he heard wasn't just a politician. It was someone more powerful, more dangerous. Someone who could topple not just his career, but his entire life. The officer's voice cracked. "They won't stop at scaring you. They'll come for you, for your family. You have no idea how deep this goes. Darnell's heart pounded, his mind racing. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about a traffic stop. This was about something bigger. Something that reached into the highest corridors of power. The room went cold. And with a single name, the battle lines had been drawn. Because the fight wasn't just with the governor anymore. It was with the empire behind him. The name hung in the air like smoke. The arresting officer's whisper was shaky, but the impact was seismic. Darnell Carter, Attorney General, stood frozen in his office. The officer's eyes darted around nervously, as though simply saying the name had painted a target on his back. Darnell leaned in, his voice low. "Are you sure?" The officer nodded, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "Dead sure. This wasn't just the governor's doing. He's working for someone else. Someone bigger. The order to stop you, it came from the Senate Majority Leader himself." Darnell's chest tightened. Senator Raymond Holbrook. A man with deep pockets, deeper connections, and a reputation for crushing anyone who stood in his way. Holbrook wasn't just a politician, he was the machine. If the governor was the face of power, Holbrook was the iron fist behind it. Darnell paced slowly, his mind racing. "Why me? Why now?" The officer's voice cracked. "Because you've been digging into the wrong things. Holbrook's been funneling state funds into private contracts, kickbacks, dirty money. Word is, you were getting too close. This arrest wasn't random. It was a message. And if you don't back down, it'll get worse." The words cut deep. The pieces began falling into place. The harassment. The threats. The governor's attempt to silence him. This wasn't about one crooked cop. This was about a conspiracy stretching to the top. Darnell exhaled slowly, staring out the window at the city lights. He thought of the people chanting his name on courthouse steps, demanding justice. He thought of the young protesters holding signs, believing in him. And he thought of his wife, his children, their safety now hanging in the balance. "No," he whispered. "They don't get to bury the truth. Not this time." The next day, Darnell made his move. He called a press conference, not on courthouse steps this time, but in the heart of the state capitol. Cameras crowded the marble steps, microphones bristled like spears, and a sea of protesters filled the street, chanting his name. Darnell stepped up to the podium, his suit sharp, his voice steady but charged with fire. "I was arrested last week," he began, "not because I broke the law, but because powerful men were afraid of the truth I was uncovering." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters leaned in. "I have evidence," Darnell continued, holding up a thick folder. "Evidence that state funds have been stolen, funneled into private pockets, while our communities suffer. And I have reason to believe this corruption reaches the highest offices of our state." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, others shouted in anger, but all eyes were locked on him. Inside the building, behind tinted windows, Governor Whitaker and Senator Holbrook watched. Whitaker's jaw was tight, but Holbrook. He smiled. A cold, dangerous smile. "Let him talk," Holbrook muttered. "It won't matter." That night, Darnell sat in his office surrounded by files, his team working feverishly to prepare indictments. Every document, every bank record, every witness statement pointed higher and higher, straight to Holbrook. But as midnight approached, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice spoke, "You should have listened, Carter. You had a chance to walk away. Now it's too late." The line went dead. Seconds later, the power in the building flickered, then cut. His office went dark. Outside, tires screeched. Darnell rushed to the window and saw them, two black SUVs pulling up, men in suits pouring out. They weren't ordinary thugs. They moved with precision. Trained. Armed. Everybody out. Darnell shouted to his staff. Now. Panic erupted as his team scrambled, papers flying, laptops slammed shut. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the stairwell. Darnell grabbed the folder of evidence, clutching it to his chest. His heart pounded, but his resolve was steel. They will not silence me. He slipped out a side door, running down the alley. But the SUV's headlights swung, catching him in their beam. Men gave chase, their footsteps thunderous on the pavement. "Get him," one shouted. Darnell sprinted, lungs burning, the evidence folder tight in his grip. His mind raced through back streets, through shortcuts only locals knew. But every turn, every shadow, they were there, closing in. Finally, he burst into an old church at the edge of town. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind him. The place was dark, silent, the air thick with incense and dust. He collapsed into a pew, clutching the folder, gasping for breath. From the shadows, a voice echoed. Calm. Cold. Familiar. "Well done, Carter. I didn't think you'd make it this far." Darnell froze. Slowly, he looked up. There, standing at the altar as if he owned it, was Senator Holbrook. Behind him, the governor, and several armed men. It was no longer whispers or threats. The machine had revealed its face. Holbrook's voice was smooth, calculated. "You've caused me quite the headache. But you're clever. Brave. I almost respect that. Almost." Darnell stood, squaring his shoulders. "You can threaten me. You can chase me. But you can't hide from the truth. I have everything I need to bring you down." Holbrook smirked, stepping closer. "You think a few papers will save you? You think the system works for men like you? No, Carter. The system was built to bury you. And tonight, it will." At his signal, the armed men stepped forward, surrounding Darnell. But before they could close in, the church doors burst open. Floodlights. Voices shouting. FBI jackets flooding the room. Federal agents. "Drop your weapons." The armed men froze. The governor stumbled back in shock. For the first time, Holbrook's calm mask cracked. Darnell's chest heaved as agents rushed forward, seizing weapons, forcing men to their knees. One agent approached Darnell, nodding respectfully. "Mr. Attorney General, we got your message. We're here." Holbrook's glare burned like fire. "You'll regret this, Carter. You've started something you can't finish." Darnell met his eyes, voice steady. "No, Senator. You finished yourself." The agents dragged Holbrook and Whitaker away, their shouts echoing through the church. The battle seemed won. But as Darnell stood in the chaos, clutching his evidence, one agent leaned close and whispered words that froze his blood. "You don't understand. Holbrook wasn't the top. He was just the front man. There's someone else. Someone higher. And they're not going down without a war." Darnell's breath caught. His eyes widened. If Holbrook wasn't the top, then who was? The fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The night of the arrest should have felt like victory. Senator Holbrook and Governor Whitaker were dragged out in cuffs, their empire of corruption laid bare before flashing cameras and screaming reporters. The people cheered, banners waved, and for one fleeting moment, it felt like the war was over. But deep in Darnell Carter's chest, a weight pressed down harder than ever. He knew the whispered words from that FBI agent weren't a bluff. Holbrook was powerful, yes, but not the architect. He was only the mask of something far darker, far deeper. And now, the mask had been torn away. 3 weeks later, the storm arrived. Protests had grown louder, spilling into every corner of the state. Communities that had long been silenced rose with one voice, demanding accountability, demanding justice. Darnell became a symbol, his image on posters, his speeches replayed on TV, his name trending on every platform. But symbols painted targets. The threats intensified. His phone rang at all hours, distorted voices, veiled warnings, promises of ruin. His security detail doubled, but even they were uneasy. Late one evening, while reviewing case files in his office, Darnell received a package. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. One line. Typed in bold. Meet me at the Capitol Dome, midnight. Come alone, or everything burns. His blood ran cold. The night was bitter, the air thick with silence as Darnell climbed the steps of the Capitol Dome. The city below lay quiet, blanketed in shadow, as if holding its breath. At the top, standing before the massive bronze statue that crowned the dome, was a figure. Tall. Imposing. Cloaked in the darkness of a long coat. As Darnell approached, the figure turned. And for the first time, the true architect stepped into the light. Chief Justice Marcus Hale. The state's highest judge. The man who presided over the courts with an iron gavel, the man seen as untouchable, above politics. A man Darnell had once admired. Justice Hale, Darnell's voice trembled between disbelief and fury. It was you. Hale's smile was thin, cruel. It has always been me. The revelation cut deeper than any knife. Hale spoke, his voice echoing against the marble dome. You think men like Holbrook run the game? They were pawns. Useful, greedy pawns. But the real power has always been in the courts. The laws. The rulings. The shadows where no one dares to look. And I have ruled from those shadows for decades. Darnell's fists clenched. You've twisted justice into a weapon. You've ruined lives. Hale chuckled darkly. Justice was never the point. Control was. And men like you, ambitious, righteous, you make fine martyrs. The arrest was supposed to end you. But instead, you became a hero. And now, I have to break you in front of them all. From the shadows of the dome, armed men emerged. Not hired thugs. Not politicians. Federal marshals, sworn officers of the court. Loyal to Hale. Darnell's heart pounded. This was no backroom threat. This was an execution. But Darnell hadn't come unprepared. As Hale stepped closer, his voice dripping with menace, a sound cut through the night. The whir of a helicopter. The blare of a loudspeaker. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Hands in the air. Floodlights bathed the dome in blinding white. Agents rappelled down from above, storming the rooftop, weapons drawn. Hale's marshals spun, guns raised, but the numbers weren't in their favor. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked across the dome. Shouts echoed. Marshals grappled with agents, fists and batons clashing in a storm of violence. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off steel and stone. In the chaos, Hale grabbed Darnell by the collar, dragging him toward the edge of the dome. You don't understand. Hale roared, spit flying from his lips. You can cut me down, but the system lives on. Men like me built it to last. You'll never win, Carter. Never. Darnell struggled, the city spinning beneath his feet, but his grip on the folder of evidence never faltered. With all his strength, he shoved Hale back, the older man stumbling but catching himself. Their eyes locked. This system was built to bury us, Darnell growled. But tonight, it buries you. In that instant, an FBI agent's shot rang out. Hale staggered, clutching his chest, his face frozen in shock. He stumbled backward, teetered on the dome's edge, then fell, his body disappearing into the night. The rooftop fell silent. The gunfire ceased. The fight was over. The fallout was explosive. News of Chief Justice Hale's corruption shattered the state. Headlines blared across the nation. Years of hidden rulings, backroom deals, and silenced dissent were dragged into the light. His death sealed him as both villain and warning. Holbrook and Whitaker were formally indicted, their empires dismantled piece by piece. Marshals loyal to Hale faced charges of treason. For the first time in decades, the machine faltered. And through it all, the people marched. Stronger. Louder. United. Darnell became more than Attorney General. He became a movement. A living reminder that even in a system designed to break you, truth and resistance could still crack the walls. But victory came with scars. One night, months later, after the indictments and the trials, after the headlines had begun to fade, Darnell sat on his porch in the quiet of dawn. His wife slept inside. His children dreamed. The city hummed faintly in the distance. He held a letter in his hand. No sender. Just like before. One line. The system doesn't die with one man. We are many. And we are watching. Darnell closed his eyes, the weight of it pressing down. He knew this fight wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But he also knew one truth, one they could never take from him. He had stood. He had fought. And he had shown the world that even when the machine roared, even when the system bore down with its full weight, one man, with truth as his weapon, could shake it to its core.